It is complicated because most food we eat is processed to some extent. So even something like butter or milk can be considered processed because it's not just eating the raw plant or just cutting that bit of meat from the animal and eating it. But what we mean by ultra processed is when the the food itself no longer resembles the original ingredients, so that you are using extracts of plants or meats that no longer are the same as those original members, and you're putting them together in a factory in a way that you lose all the structure of those original foods, and you're just taking bits of them from a sort of chemistry set. And they tend to have at least 10 ingredients. And to make them stick together, they've often got these glues or gums or thickeners to make them seem like real foods again. So they're like reconstituting these foods. And this is unfortunately what constitutes 50% of our diet in the UK and 60% of our diet in the US.
Which is an enormous number, right? So you're saying, half to well over half of everything you eat is this sort of rebuilt food instead of something which bears any real resemblance to the diet that we clearly ate until 100 years ago.
Absolutely right. And not every country does this. So there are countries in Europe and Mediterranean, like Portugal, that only have 10% of their food in that way. So it's definitely something that affects particular countries that maybe lacked a food culture, but also had very strong business links and lobbying links of the food industry to point us in this direction. And, and the fact that we went for new, modern, scientific foods that may be easier to cook with and cut out a lot of those old time-wasting methods. But at what cost? And I think when I first started writing this book 6 years ago, the emphasis was all about, they have high in sugar, they're high in fats, they're high in salt, and that basically if you reduce those three things, you can make them healthier. And that's still the main establishment government approach to ultra-processed food, and one that the food industry is quite happy with, because they can keep substituting different chemicals to reduce the sugar by artificial sweeteners. They can reduce fat levels by increasing carbohydrates and other sugars and sugar alcohols, etc. And they can reduce the salt by, again, tampering with the structure of the food and using different preservatives. So all of it you can get round. But I think what I found was that there was some new research showing that ultra-processed food works not through those the bad effects of those chemicals, those three sort of macronutrients, if you like, but actually it's the whole process. It's these extra chemicals that act in two ways to really harm us. First is our gut microbes through the chemicals like emulsifiers and thickeners that and artificial sweeteners that in most people, and this might be personalized as well, our gut microbes react to and produce chemicals that make us sicker than if we weren't eating them, and might make us more hungry, might send signals to the brain to overeat and put on weight, and generally mess up our gut microbiome.
So basically there are chemicals in this, just to play, make sure that we're all following. You're saying now you feel these chemicals in this ultra processed food, which are sort of directly triggering actions in these trillions of bacteria, which are then creating their own chemicals that really affect our health and our brain and things like that. Is that what you're saying, Tim?
Yes. So it's not a direct effect. It's as you said, it's through our gut microbes, which I think we need to think of as like these pharmacies where they're producing chemicals for us instead of our body. And sometimes they produce the same chemicals that our body produces, but through an alternate pathway. And something that we're just learning more and more about all the things they produce. So this is a very new science, but it's showing us how things that we thought were completely inert, like artificial sweeteners, like carrageenans, which are like thickeners, or other lecithin emulsifiers, sucralose. We're told they can't harm you because we've done the studies to show that. It doesn't cause cancer or anything, but it does mess with your body, and it does that, we think, through the gut microbes. But the other convincing bit of evidence for me was this couple of things that have come about. The most striking was this study from the NIH, Kevin Hall's group, where compared two different, in a very strict environment in a lab, they gave for a couple of weeks people two different diets, one matched for calories completely, one a whole food diet made from real food, and the other a copy of it made from ultra processed food. And they were both equally satisfying for the participants, but the group that had the ultra processed equivalent kept saying they were hungrier, and they went back to eat more and more every day. So they were overeating by about 200 calories a day. So there's something else in that food, that's nothing to do with the calories, nothing to do with the salt, the sugar, everything else, because they were matched, that is telling the brain, eat more. And we don't know if that's direct or through the gut microbes. But once you really absorb that information, you think, gosh, if I'm having this every day of my life in some form, this is perhaps why we're in such a mess in countries that have high ultra processed food percentages in their diet, like the US, like the UK, like Canada, Australia, and Germany in Europe. And that's why we've got part of this problem, because we've just seen it as a reductionist idea of, we only got to change the salt for sodium, potassium. We've only got to switch the fats for proteins and a bit of carbs. We've only got to take the sweeteners away and add other chemicals. That changes nothing. And so I've really become much more anti ultra processed food.
And that's a big shift, isn't it? That you're saying, I think, I remember when we first spoke that you were particularly concerned there was no fiber in it, so it wasn't sort of positively feeding the bacteria. And now you're talking about it almost as if we were taking a drug, right? It sounds like almost like you're describing what would be happening if I was taking a medical drug that I don't need. And we all know that all these different, many drugs have side effects, right? They say on the label, may cause obesity or may cause you to nausea. And just, if I play that back, Tim, you're really describing this as if these are sort of like medication, but we are not being prescribed it by the doctor, right? We're just buying it at the corner store and eating it because it tastes delicious.
Yeah, and it's been designed by really brainy people, brilliant food scientists who have spent 30 years now trying to create this perfect mix of chemicals that satisfies your taste buds and makes you want to eat more of it. And that's what they're paid to do. And they do it brilliantly. And they're doing it ever and ever cheaper. So using cheaper and cheaper products, more synthetic products to do that with really no restraints at all.
Brilliant.